Hello, everyone. I hope my voice is clear. Very good morning to all of you. It's indeed my great pleasure to welcome every one of you to this book launch event on behalf of Samvada World. The book is titled India's Role in the Emerging World Order, Challenges and Opportunities. It's a compilation of articles that have appeared in Samvada World, which was launched, as many of us know, roughly more than a year ago, in November 2020. And since then, Samvada World has become a prominent player in the media space, publishing articles and interviews on many geopolitical matters that are of national interest to us. So this is indeed a great event, and I am really delighted to welcome all of you to this event. We have a very eminent panel of three guests today. I will introduce them in a couple of minutes. Before that, a few initial remarks to set the context and tell you what to expect over the next 90 minutes. Today also happens to be the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas, January 9th, where, as many of us know, more than a century ago, Gandhiji returned from South Africa on this day. That's why we are celebrating today, January 9th, as Pravasi Bharatiya Divas. And one could say that Gandhiji's return to India sort of spawned off a series of geopolitical events in which India was a major player. And more than 100 years now, we are still talking about geopolitics and India's role, because the world order has changed quite a bit in the last 30, 40 years, especially post-Cold War, where the bipolar world has now become a multipolar world, and India is one of the stronger and emerging players in this world. So we are here to discuss what exactly is going to be India's role, what are the challenges and opportunities, and how, based on our national interest, how should we go about it. And to do this, we have to do the book launch, as well as there is also going to be a panel discussion, which will be prefaced by initial remarks from our eminent panel. And then there will be a panel discussion, which I will moderate. And after that, the event will end. This event, I believe, is going live on Facebook. So whoever is joining on Facebook, welcome to all of you as well. And for everyone in the audience, we hope that there will be time for a few questions. We would like to wrap it up in 90 minutes, but I would still like to take a few questions if you have any questions to our eminent panel. So you can type your questions, I think, in the chat window, and our team will compile. And depending on the time available, I'll pick one or two questions which are not already covered by the panel discussion and the initial remarks. And then we will have our eminent panel address those questions. So, as I said, the world order is changing post-Cold War, and, especially in the last 20, 30 years, in the context of globalization, Brexit, what's happening in the Middle East, China emerging as a great player, and India emerging as a strong player. So the world order is changing, and we are going to discuss what is going to be India's role. And for doing this, we have three eminent guests who are with us. I will have the honor of introducing them, starting with Professor Madhav Das Nalapat. He is with us. Many of us know he is not new to us. He is a veteran journalist and an expert in geopolitical affairs. He is the director of Department of Geopolitics and International Relations at Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He is also the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian and the ITV Network India, and vice chair of Manipal University's Advanced Research Group. Previously, he has been the editor of Times of India and Mathrubhumi. Professor Nalapat has a gold medal in economics from Bombay University, and he started way back with the Center for Political Research in 1974, where probably some of us were not even born. And he pioneered many concepts like the India-China-Russia trilateral alliance, Wahhabism as the main security threat of the future, and many other. Most recently, he predicted that the Arab Spring would eventually evolve into a Wahhabi winter. And he has authored many books on geopolitics. He writes extensively on security, policy, and international affairs. And currently, he is a member of the Executive Committee of Editors Guild of India. Indeed, we are very pleased and honored to have you, sir. Thank you for being on board. We also have Sri Ram Madhavji from Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. He has been a Swayamsevak for several decades, right from his formative years, and currently he is on the national executive of Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh. Previously, he was a national general secretary of the Bharatiya Janata Party, and he is also a member on the board. He's also on the board of governors of India Foundation, a New Delhi-based premier think tank. Ram Madhavji is a renowned author and thinker, and he has more than 200 publications to his credit. He has authored several books in English and Telugu, and his most recent book being The Hindutva Paradigm, Integral Humanism, and the Quest for a Non-Western Worldview. And he is a regular contributor to many of the journals and magazines like the Indian Express, Hindustan Times, Open Magazine, etc. He is also the editor of Bharatiya Prajna, a monthly magazine in English published by Prajna Bharati, and an associate editor of Jagruti, a Telugu weekly. So he is widely traveled, and he is very knowledgeable, and he has expert opinion on global affairs. And last but not the least, we also have Dr. Nanda Kishore, who is an associate professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies, Pondicherry University. And previously, he was heading the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations and coordinator of Center for Polish and Central European Studies, Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He has an MPhil and PhD in political science from Hyderabad Central University, and he has completed his postdoc at the University of Leiden, Netherlands, with Erasmus Mundus Fellowship. And he has got several fellowships and scholarships, including the ones from Brookings Foundation and Government of Finland, among others. And he is also widely traveled and a subject matter expert on the Middle East and many other geopolitical domains. And we are indeed very pleased and honored to have all the eminent guests with us today, who will be sharing their insights on our topic of India's role in emerging world order, challenges and opportunities. So we will now have the virtual book launch in the presence of our eminent guests. Because of COVID, we couldn't meet in person, so we will now have a virtual launch. So I think Harish will do the honors to carry out the process. Harish? Yeah. So this is the book. So we will consider that the launch is happening, and it is in both English and Kannada. It's available in a couple of outlets, the Ayodhya Books and another one. We will give you the details in the end. So all of you can purchase, read, recommend, and take advantage of all the insightful articles that are part of this book. So thank you. Thank you, Harish. So to give you an idea of what the contents of the book are and what is the context behind this, may I now invite Prashant Vaidyanathan, who is the editor of Samvada World. A few words of introduction about Prashant. Prashant is actually a computer science engineer by profession. He was trained as a computer science engineer, but in the last decade or even more, I would say he has been pursuing journalism more actively than computer science, I think. So he has served as the bureau chief of Organizer English Weekly, and also he was the editor of Asima English Weekly. Since November 2020, he is the editor of Samvada World, which covers international affairs. Prashant.
So here goes. The readings in the book on the danger posed to the security and well-being of India by the Sino-Wahhabi alliance has been painstakingly brought out. There is not a trace of the illusory in what has been pointed out as the situation facing a country. Many of the problems enervating India arise from the marginalization in the policy sphere of civil society and the complete control that the civil service has over it. This book tells us why a view, although present for centuries in a country, is wrong. This is Professor M.D. Nalapat in his foreword to the book. Then, international relations have been changing in a rapid phase, and geopolitical events across the spectrum indicate the necessity to be aware of the happenings around the world. India believes in the enlightened national interest, and for any nation and its national interest is primordial. Communicating what that national interest means for the population is a Herculean task, and for any state more so, in the case of India, with its vastness, population diversity. The gap that exists between what a state aspires to do and what it can really do, and how it communicates with national interest to its citizens is the crucial factor. So this is Dr. Nanda Kishore while writing his observations for the book, which has been published on the back cover. And then Ramadevji writes in his article in the book titled Need for a New Culture of Geopolitics and Geostrategy, which is incidentally the first article in the book. He writes, in just 3 decades, the world has swung from bipolarity to heteropolarity through unipolarity and multipolarity. Its pace is so dazzling that many still do not realize that we have already moved beyond the multipolar world order. There are too many non-state poles that defy geographical boundaries and occupy demographic spaces, from business corporations to non-governmental activists to religious empires to terrorist traders. Sadly, when the country are forced into remaking of the world order, no clear agenda or articulation is to be seen on the horizon. History will not wait for anyone. It marches on. The world will acquire a renewed shape and form as we watch in awe and anticipation. So the reason, and we are lucky to have all of them here today. The reason I quote these words from the book is to highlight the nature and purpose of the book. And as Raghutamji highlighted, the purpose of Samvada World since its inception has also been to make sense of developments around the world. So the world today needs, this as our eminent panelists have highlighted, requires a reinterpretation of globalization and requires insights about sustainable development models and social values for a harmonious living. So this has also been purpose of Samvada World and also of the book. So getting into the formal introduction of the book, the articles have been written by various authors, including Sri Ramadevji, as I mentioned. And the book has also been translated into Kannada with the title Navajagatika Vyavaste Drushtikonagalu Akyanagalu. Now, the book is divided into 7 sections, each focusing on an area of interest to the reader, as also the analysis of the various issues. For example, the section on Indian foreign policy focuses on how India dealt with international events in the last year, what it could have done better and what it needs to do better in the future. India's growing strategic role in G20, BRICS, direction of Indian foreign policy during PM Narendra Modi's tenure, India's policy consideration in Afghanistan, West Asia, and countering China's BRI have been handled in this section. China is a global power, and every action it takes or is involved in scrutinized as it should be. Hence, a separate section has been dedicated to China, analyzing its role in world events and happenings in a neighborhood beyond. and the impact it has on the world, especially India. The fractures in Indo-China relationships, China's geostrategy in Indian Ocean, 100 years of CCP in the analysis of the party, Chinese machinations in Nepal, Myanmar, and India's border have been handled in this section. Similarly, Afghanistan, Central Asia, world affairs, including the role of bodies like G20, G7, the United Nations, and India's neighborhood are the other sections that focus on that particular area. And as we all know, just like China, India too, through its actions and growth, has captured the world's attention. And there are forces that want to create hiccups in its path, and that's a truth which we all know. So this section, India Focus, is to lay before the readers such efforts and what forces and agencies we need to be wary about. And there are a few examples which we have, which our authors have, written in their articles. So, in conclusion, I'm reminded of what Harvard University Professor Joseph Nye had said. In the information age, it is often the side which has the better story that wins, as much as whose army wins. So we hope through this collection of articles, we add to this effort in building the story which India wants to narrate about itself to the world. Thank you. Over to you, Raghutamji.
Thanks, Prashant. So we will now have the initial remarks from our eminent guests, starting with Professor Nalapath, and then Ram Madhavji, and then Dr. Nandakishore. And I request our eminent guests to keep your initial remarks to about 5-6 minutes, and we will have a more detailed discussion during the panel discussion. So over to you, Professor Nalapath.
Thank you very much. I would only like to say that I am surprised that people who talk about democracy, freedom of speech, they believe that it is essentially freedom to propagate their own point of view. And any contrarian point of view is frankly regarded by them as almost an infringement of democracy, of rights and freedoms. I think, this is a very, very fascinating book with an alternative view, a view alternative to what we have witnessed over so many decades. And may I point out that, that there's a very old saying which has been said a zillion times: the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Well, the reality is that we have seen now how so many countries have gone ahead of India in economic growth, how India has had multiple reverses, as a matter of fact. So definitely at least some of the prescriptions that have been made in the past are not working. But those prescriptions are still presented by those who believe that they are the present and the future. The past is the past, the present is the present, and the future is the future. There are three distinct stages. What I liked about this particular book is the fact that it presents an alternative view. It does not claim to be the only view. It does not claim to be, the dominant view. But although more and more people are subscribing to this view, but I think this is where it is important. Why? Because we are today in an age of an attempt at unipolarity. My very dear friend Ram Madhav has always mentioned about the importance of multipolarity in the world, of multiple locations of power, etc. And I fully agree with him. There was a brief unipolar moment for the United States after the Soviet Union collapsed. Some people say it ended in 1997 with the handover of Hong Kong. Others say it's about 2005. But it was very clear by that period, at least, the US unipolarity is over. Now what we are seeing is an attempt at a fresh unipolarity. This time, a Chinese unipolarity. And the political systems of both, the traditions of both, the peoples of both are very different. Peoples in the sense of the people in authority, the people in power, are very different from each other. So this effort at creating a new unipolarity is what is confronting the world today. And I just want to end my this particular thing by saying, India had a golden opportunity in the 1950s. Prime Minister Nehru stood tall among world leaders. We were possibly among the first countries to win our freedom. And we won our freedom in multiple ways, some of which are accurately recorded, others of which are ignored. But, the 1950s were a period when India was on the world stage and was tall. But then what happened? They were missed challenges. They were missed opportunities. And most unfortunately of all, our economic growth still lagged behind what was needed, with the result that per capita income, for example, in countries, including in Asia, that in the 1950s were way poorer than us, are today way above us. So now we have a new opportunity in this attempt at unipolarity, in this new multipolarity, in the rise of India, principally the Indian people. Not only the traditions of India. I've always said those who say Indian history is 600 years and those who say Indian history is 4,400 years are both wrong. It's 5,000 years. It's a continuum. But this is our new opportunity. And we should not miss this opportunity as we missed during the 1950s. It has been a very costly mistake for us from the 1950s onwards to have missed so many opportunities and to have been blind to so many challenges. We cannot afford that in the present era. And I would like to basically say, I found this book to be a very useful attempt at ensuring that we do not miss the opportunity, miss the challenge, and that India not only stands tall, but remains tall.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Narpal. Ram Madhavji, your initial remarks.
Namaskar. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This title of the book as well as the panel discussion today is about the emerging new world order and the possible role for India. It contains two parts. One, a realization that a new world order is emerging, which is a fact. World order keeps undergoing transformation from time to time. The last time that such a transformation happened was immediately after the Second World War. A Eurocentric world order was sought to be built after the Second World War, in which the Western European powers and America were largely successful. It is they who had set the narrative for the world. Whatever lofty, noble socio-political ideals we talk about today were all the products of that churning after the Second World War, when nationalisms became bad words, internationalism became the in thing, ideas like democracy, that to liberal democracy, fundamental rights, international relations based on trade and military alliances, all these things and many other things came into the new world order post the Second World War. That world order is definitely, if not crumbling, going to take a back seat. The pandemic, the COVID pandemic, has now set the ball in motion for a new world order to rise. This new world order is going to have different agenda items, not the ones that we had seen in last 7 decades. The new agenda items could be things like climate change, healthcare issues, technology, how and why you use it is going to be a big defining factor in building the new world order. And the rights discourse is going to take many new paths, many new trends. These are the kind of issues that are going to dominate the emerging new world order. So first part of it is that there is going to be a new world order emerging. The second part, of course, is that India has a role to play. The title surmises that yes, we have a role to play in this. Problem is, India has two, three very significant handicaps. Professor Nalpat tried to draw our attention to some of them. I will probably be repeating them. The very first thing is that do we really have that realization that there is actually a new world order building? Indians are known to be reticent people. We are known for punching way below our weight. When the previous world order was in the making, there was an opportunity given to India also. Honestly speaking, the European powers saw in India a fellow traveler because the British were ruling over India. So they had seen India as a fellow traveler and wanted India to also play a role in it. We played a very limited role. We played some role in the making of the Human Rights Charter by UNHRC. But otherwise, we told the Western powers that, look, we have freshly become independent. We don't have time for playing a bigger role in the world affairs. As Professor Nalpat pointed out, Nehru, of course, in the initial years for 4-5 years, he did want to play a bigger role. He did try to bring certain countries together and create a kind of forge a new kind of an alliance. But the problem is that that alliance did not have any agenda. The very name itself was the Alliance of Non-Aligned Nations. To put it bluntly, it was neither here nor there nations. You are neither with America nor with Russia, to aajao. This could not have been any basis for any alliance formation, but those days were the days of romance, international affairs. So that romantic notion that we should stay away from both groups, and in the process, we ended up creating a third group that did not last long for more than 5 years. Then with Bandung Conference, that whole initiative had died its natural death, and 62 came, teaching India a big lesson that first you have to focus on your own affairs, then you can think of playing a bigger role in the world. Then, as Professor Nalpat pointed out, we have completely turned inwards. The second biggest problem with us is we lack what can be called as strategic culture. If you want to play a role in the international affairs, you should have a strategic thinking, strategic outlook. We don't have. We are ad hocists. We go by the challenges as they come. We did not anticipate that something like this would happen in Afghanistan. We went on pumping money, and when Taliban took over, we started crying, "Arey, we have invested, $300 billion, this, that." Did you not realize before investing $300 billion that there could be a possibility of the Taliban coming back? What were you doing? Because we did not have that habit of thinking strategically. Since there was a reference to China trying to become a unipolar, build a unipolar world order, which is true. I mean, China wants to dominate, just as the Western powers dominated the making of the last world order. China wants to dominate the making of the new world order. There is no doubt about it. Professor Nalpat was on dot when he said about it. But remember, only point I would contest is they did not start it in 1997 with Hong Kong. They had a long-term vision. In fact, there is a wonderful book called The Long Game, Rush Doshi's book. One should read it. How they planned each stage before they reached a situation where now today they can openly say that here are we ready to play a major role in making of the world order. So it was a long-term vision, a strategic, number of goalposts that they had set for themselves for every 10 years, every 20 years. First 20 years, they simply focused on blunting American capabilities. They did not even build their navy until they actually, first of all, developed technologies to blunt the advantage that the Americans had enjoyed. Once they succeeded in blunting America's advantage, now they are building, they have 70 nuclear propelled submarines today. They have number of warships today. Today, they are dominating the Indo-Pacific region. So what I'm trying to say is that kind of strategic thinking and strategic culture, it is terribly lacking in our country. The third, for India to play any role in the world, first of all, it has to become an economically strong power. We are in a very pitiable condition today. In politics, we give only the rosy numbers. We say that we are the fifth or seventh largest GDP in the world. It doesn't say any story. In terms of GDP per capita, we are 152nd in the world. India's economy is in no way in any position. We are not in a position to invest heavily on our military. Today there is no longer any single soft power concept anymore. It has to be a sharp power, a smart power, which is a combination of hard and soft powers. This even China had learned after spending millions of dollars on Confucius Institutes. For that to happen, you need to have a strong financial muscle. Your pockets should be heavy. So I think India suffers from these handicaps. We need to immediately turn our attention to these things. We have to build a long-term plan for ourselves. We have to, first of all, appreciate that we have a role to play in this new world order. We have a role, not the topic of the day, but we have a role to play. But first of all, we have to realize we should now give up that habit of punching below our weight. We should proactively come forward. But for that to happen, we should have a long-term vision. A strategic culture needs to be developed in this country. And finally, we should build a strong economy in this country that can take care of all the 21st century needs, whether it is about building newer technologies or building a very advanced military or strengthening our own institutional infrastructure. Even for that, we need a strong economy. So next 10 years that way will be very crucial. If we succeed in building these three things, then I'm sure come 2030s, there is going to be a major shift in the fortunes of many countries, including China. It's an evening economy. Its demographics is going against the country. So there will be certain very important shifts happening. We will be in a position to then step in and play our role. So with these few comments, I thank you once again for giving me this opportunity. Namaste.
Thank you very much, Ram Madhavji, for your very eloquent initial remarks. Now, Dr. Nanda Kishore, your initial remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Raghutam. It's an honor to be present in this very eventful day. My special congratulations goes to Prashant Vaidraj for being editor of this book and then percolating the knowledge that is much required, not going back to the silos and being in Cold War politics, but looking at what is required for the future, how we have to concentrate on becoming a better nation. And it's also a pleasure to see my own guru, Professor Madhav Nalapat, and then also Ram Madhavji, all these people. And then I also have many other good friends, including Pradeepji. It's always a pleasure. What I came across this particular book, because this segment is largely about reflecting on the book, there are extremely interesting articles that have come through in the form of precise capsules that are required, because this generation also doesn't have time to read 25-30 pages articles and then digest what is it and then jargons, so many other things. The greatest strength of this particular book is its relevance. Second is the lucid language that it has. Third, it's informative. That's what is exactly required. We live in a world of information, and I think that information is precisely provided in this one. I'm sure this is only the beginning, but there are many, many more accolades that are going to come in this way. And I think the very idea of starting Samvada World to go beyond the nationalistic look and then look at international affairs, what India has to play, I think it's a noble affair where next generation of leaders, next generation of students, next generation of citizens of this country who are going to be responsible, who are going to be taking on this particular work will certainly feel motivated. And I'm sure that many of them will be able to reflect, and then they'll get back once they get a copy in their hand and then they start reading. So from that perspective, looking at the varied components that have come in, whether it is a maritime component, whether it is Southeast Asia, whether it is Belt and Road Initiative, whether it is about few articles that are also written by very, very eminent people, all reflects on the new thinking that has come in. We are not anymore apologists. We are not anymore looking back to be taking rescue and victimhood. What we are trying to look at is the opportunities that world has for us and what way best we can do. Second is an introspection. That is very, very important. Until and unless there is an introspection, as Ram Madhavji just spoke about, where we need to augment, where we need to go forward, I think that is very important. And with the type of information and with the type of guidance that is coming from leaders like the predecessors, the two speakers, I'm pretty sure that we are in safe hands. And I'm also sure that the new generation will be able to think in those lines. And this book is perhaps makes all the best efforts that is required to bring out the best in the new generation that is thinking about international relations. Because as a discipline itself, it used to be a very late one. It's only last 10 years that we are seeing youngsters are much more keen to learn about it. They were looking for information. They were looking for right sort of information. That's also very important. I have to put across. There is a lot more available from Wikipedia to everything, but they were trying to look at some sort of information, an alternate discourse, and also a confident India. I think that's how I would want to sum up in three words or 3 lines if I have to put across. And this contribution will go in a long way, and I'm sure it will enlighten many more who are listening to us being here online and rest of the things. I'll keep my other comments to the section that we have further to come without any delay. Thank you for the opportunity. Grateful to all of you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore. So now we will get into the panel discussion, where I want to do it in 2 rounds. And for the panel discussion, I want to go to the specifics. I mean, the initial remarks from all the 3 eminent guests covered a lot of ground, but I want to go into the specifics. So I'm going to be asking focused specific questions to each one of you, starting with the Professor Nalapath and then Ram Madhavji and then Nandakishore. So in the first round, we will be focusing on specific countries, specific geographies. And then in the second round, I want to focus on a point that Ram Madhavji also touched upon, India's capability to play a leadership role. What are we doing now? What is lacking? How can we go about it in the future? So that will be for the second round. So for the first round, I want to start, Professor Nalapath, with China. As you mentioned, China wants to be, and it's very clear that China wants to be the new unipolar hegemon. It's very clear from its actions. 20, 30 years ago, Deng Xiaoping is supposed to have, the Chinese premier is supposed to have said, walk with a stick, but talk softly. Now they are not talking softly anymore, and they are beginning to use the stick as well. So China is the new proverbial 5,000-pound, maybe not a gorilla, but a dragon. So in terms of how India as a nation, not just the political aspect, economic, social, think tanks, research, all of that, how are we handling China? Do you see a change that's happening? What are the things that are still missing? How should we go about it to make sure that, when we want to play that leadership role, we don't get handicapped by the fact that the gap between India and China is too huge? Your thoughts?
I'd like to say that I fully agree with Ram that from the very beginning, for last century, the Chinese Communist Party has focused on making China once again the Middle Kingdom. I have always said that the CCP is a party of Han nationalism. Han is the dominant, ethno-centered, culture-centered community in China. Now, the point is very simple. We have to beat China at our game and to an extent at their game. And what does that mean? For example, I'll tell you, whether it's the Soviet Union, whether it's anywhere else, there is an atmosphere of freedom, a freedom of the mind, if I may say so, that promotes research, that promotes the accumulation of knowledge. Now, in the Soviet Union, for example, if you were a space scientist or a nuclear scientist, you had a wide degree of freedom. In India, it's not an accident that the greatest successes of the government of India have been in the space and atomic departments that have always been headed by domain specialists rather than by generalists. Ram was talking about basically going below, punching below your weight. Well, the reality is that is the colonial mindset. And the bureaucracy is, after all, inherited from the colonial bureaucracy. Our laws, our procedures, a lot of our system comes from the colonial period. And in that colonial period, let's not forget, we are talking about British law in India for slaves, for colonial subjects. The law in Britain for British people was very different, is very different. I mean, from the law that the British had for their colonial servants. So the first point is, today what is happening in Xi Jinping's China is that there is no freedom of thought at all. Whether you're a scientist, whether you're a technologist, whatever you are, you have got to obey what the party core wants you to obey, which is the office of General Secretary. That is where we can have an advantage. If we promote genuine freedom of thought, genuine freedom of action, and this will mean listening to views that we don't like. As I said, I was surprised at some of the negative reactions about from people I know about some of the views expressed in the items that have been talked about. The fact is, whether you agree or not, the right to disagree, the right to have a different view is central to the knowledge economy. That is where India can score. We have to rise in the knowledge economy. And may I say, not as a system, not as a state, but as people, we have done that. You go to any, whether it's the chip, whether it's a computer chip, whether it is a clean technology, any kind of science and technological innovation, you will find Indian brains very important in it across the world. That has got to be harnessed in our system. And it can only happen if we have an approach which is all of civil society. No, if you have a belief that only an IAS officer understands the domestic situation in India, only an IPS officer understands security in India, only an IFS officer understands foreign policy in India, you are actually losing the benefit of the vibrant civil society that India has had across millennia. And this is what I would like to say. This is an opportunity much bigger than the opportunity of the 1950s. It's an opportunity that we must take into our own hands. And so far, I would like to say, we seem to be doing so, but also we seem not to be doing so. And I would like to see a much better understanding, a much better realization on the part of people in government about this opportunity, and ensure that they are, in a mindset to understand itself, to understand its needs, to understand its dangers, and embrace this chance. Then, as Ram correctly said, by the next 8 or 9 years, India will emerge not only as a great power, but if I may say so, one of the top 3 powers in the world in terms of not only economics, but in terms of geopolitical influence.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Nalapal. Now my question is to Ram Madhav ji, and I want to focus on the US. As you mentioned that because of non-alignment, we sort of followed a neither here nor there kind of approach. And I think there's a recalibration of that started even from the Atalji's period, where our relation, especially with US, became more and more clearly defined. And one could say fairly that it's a work in progress. And United States is going to continue to be one of the important players, if not the most important player in the multipolar world. So how do you see our sort of tango with the US evolving from here on? What are the opportunities that we have missed, and what are the opportunities that we should not miss as we go forward, in your point of view?
United States and India share lots of things in common. That makes us, as Prime Minister Vajpayee used to say, natural allies. We are destined to work together. We are destined to grow together. So one of the major bonding factors between our two countries is close to 4 million Indian diaspora living in America. Uh, but in the changing world order, India, first of all, has to decide what role it wants to play. Is it a role which will be a secondary role to, say, big powers like America? Or it has got its own roadmap for how it wants to deal with many countries in the world? In that, I would say Prime Minister Modi has tried to chart a new course when he actually introduced that very important policy shift called the de-hyphenation. By de-hyphenation, what we meant was that we will no longer subject our relations with a given country or look at our relations with a given country from the prism of any third country. That means today, yes, between India and US, the relationship is growing very fast. We're targeting $150 billion bilateral trade. We are already close to $100 billion, and this trade will increase. This will go on, but that shouldn't affect our relations with, for example, Iran, for example, Russia, or for that matter, how we deal with China. We need to have our independent thinking and roadmap for dealing with multiple challenges that we face all around us. You must remember that global power axis today is no longer in Pacific Atlantic region. It is in the Indo-Pacific region, in our own neighborhood. When global power axis has shifted to your neighborhood, it is no point looking only towards those powers which were the big powers of the last century. I'm not trying to say that they are unimportant. I'm saying every country is important. But you should decide what is the benefit you want to get from those countries. I would say, for example, the relationship that India should have with the ASEAN group of countries is as much important as it should have with America today. Why? Because ASEAN in next 3 to 4 years is going to emerge as the third largest economic power in the world. But do you know that we just don't give any importance to ASEAN countries? When ASEAN countries, when they host their National Day events in Delhi, a junior minister goes for just 10 minutes. He perfunctorily participates, shakes hand with the ambassador and goes out, goes back. But if it is a relatively tiny country like Belgium, you will find it getting much more importance, because we still are living in that mindset that West is westward looking approach. In that, India needs to first of all revise its approach. De-hyphenation was a very important shift, but are we moving in that direction? Or it was limited to certain cosmetic things that we deal with Israel independently, Palestine independently. We deal with Russia independently, America independently. We deal with Iran independently, America independently. Is it only limited to that, or we now reprioritize our relations? Turn east. This Indo-Pacific is where next 100 years of battles are going to happen. Where are we there? Even our own neighbors, the neighborhood, SAARC neighborhood, BIMSTEC neighborhood, where are we there? India needs to think on these lines today. Have good relations with America, have good relations with other countries, but also think that in the shifting world order, your priorities are to your east, not to your left. Unfortunately, that particular realization is still very badly missing in our system. Please remember, India can really play a big role in the world. Our countries like America and Western powers would like to have India playing a bigger role only when India comes with a cohort of nations, not a standalone India. Standalone India, they have 100 issues with us. But suppose India means also Sri Lanka, India means also Bangladesh, India means also Nepal, also Bhutan, then you are actually adding great value to the to the dynamics of the new world order. We are not focusing even on that. So we need to urgently reshape, reformulate our the whole gamut of international relations, turn our attention in a big way to our neighborhood, to our east, establish here. Then, of course, America is our natural friend, natural ally. We will continue to have good relations with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram Madhavji. Now I would like to go to Dr. Nanda Kishore. We already talked about China and the US, of course, in that context, the entire geopolitics. But there are also other regions which are equally important when it comes to setting the new world order, especially Europe and Middle East. And we can see a lot of convulsion happening in the Middle East, for example, in the last 10, 20 years, where countries are trying to revisit some of their fundamentals and including relationships with other countries. A country like Saudi Arabia is even beginning to talk about reforms, and recently you had the Prince of Saudi Arabia making some statements about an organization which became very controversial. And also, a lot of other countries like Turkey and Egypt, they're also re-looking at their priorities. There are a lot of internal stuff going on. Iran, of course, and Israel, definitely. So Middle East is one area which is reshaping in a big way. And the same with Europe also. First we had the European Union, and then we had the Brexit. In between, there is also a sort of a resurgence of a kind of nationalism in Europe. And Europe is facing its own refugee crisis, for example. So in this context, how is India dealing with these two regions, Middle East and Europe, and the rest of the world, and how it should go about in your point of view? What are the things that are missing?
Okay, thank you for that question.
Are we having some connection issues? Or
very important to us, and we have been seeing dramatic changes because in West Asia we have most of them are Arab states, except we are also able to see is a renewed approach towards India. That hostility that was associated either with Palestine, the hostility that was associated with, let's say, due to Kashmir issue with Pakistan, their cordial relations with Pakistan, I think that has been put into a different perspective altogether. I think, as Ram Madhavji mentioned, the word dehyphenation is very, very important. That has come much more pragmatically since 2014 with regard to India, the way it has dealt. In our country, or there's going to be a different reaction from the Arab world. All these were unfounded fears that we were having, which of the then president, who did not belong to a formally Indian National Congress or anything, but he happened to visit there. We had an external affairs minister, then Prime Minister Modi visiting. So it has changed a scenario there where things are made to look much more normal. That is one very important component. Second is also the regime changes that have come, or let's say leadership that have changes that have come in West Asia are also very, very important. On the one hand, we might have lost someone like Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel, but we also have other one who still looks up to India in the same manner, because there is some amount of maturity that has come in the relationship, which there is no possibility of going backwards. But when we have people like Mohammed bin Salman, or we have the leadership in UAE, all these people are much more positive towards India. That's how India is able to manage its requirements. India is able to deal with a lot of complexities that are associated with, because when things like religion are used in international relations, it's not going to be easy. But to tread on that particular path and then yet manage all these things and tell people this is very normal, it is economic diplomacy that's going to be in the forefront, not anything else. Other things should be in periphery, is much better way of doing it. I think we are doing it in a right perspective, in a right way. I think things will get better. We have had an issue with, let's say, someone like Turkey, where Erdogan has been trying to become populist by trying to utilize certain aspects that are associated with, or any contradiction. I don't think any country in the world has been there without contradictions. I think every country has contradictions, and then they have their own ways of dealing with it. And India is no exemption in that particular scenario. Now, given that background, the way we have dealt with everybody when we had to teach or when we had to say certain things on face, we did it without any sort of fear. When Turkey tried overstepping, we put it in place and we said that this is what it is. You don't need to unnecessarily interfere in certain things that are no way related to you. So just don't do all those things. So we have moved out of that appeasement politics, which itself is perhaps for me a greater achievement, moving towards pragmatism in India's foreign policy itself, in India's worldview, or the outlook that we are trying to have towards the world order that we are facing. And then there are other complexities with the Abraham Accord coming in, where we see a number of countries coming out of the hostility. There is also, again, I said, it's the business interest, it's the economic diplomacy that's the core, where United States will continue to play the pivotal role, and it will continue to have its relations. And we have a triangular relation that has come up there. You have Saudi Arabia, you have Israel, you have UAE. These three will define all these things. And with all the three, India has very good relationship. And India also knows where to move in, where not to move in. When it comes to Iran and the United States, I think India backs off, and India keeps itself in a completely different manner, which is a very interesting thing to see. Europe is not that easy sort of one. Europe has multiple or let's say multi-layered contradictions when it comes to dealing with things, and they still seem to be in the 19th and the 20th century to basically try being the norm givers. They have at least understood that India has moved beyond that scenario or the situation of norm taker, and it wants to be a norm giver now. That itself is a paradigm shift that many of these powers have to understand. They still seem to be living in an utopian order where they still romanticize international relations, and they think that this is still a third world and all these people have to fall in line. There, I see bilateral relations developing much better. Things are getting much better with few countries, but there are some there here every now and then would want to put down, or they still have their colonial hangover, which will take some time, but it doesn't matter. India is focusing on business, and that business is very important. We don't need to invoke anything else. I think while shaping that, India will certainly play a different type of a role altogether, because still the financial institutions are or the leadership is in their hand. And then we still see they're trying to move on the words of secularism, democracy, to a lot of other things. I think India is much more confident these days when it talks about and whatever that it deals with. It has come up with new narrative, which I call as polemic. It has come up with that narrative, which it can very clearly put across and say, this is what I mean, and I don't need to mince words. I don't need to appease you, neither you need to do that. When I think we are trying to draw lines, and I think we are pushing towards a rule-based world order. We are trying to tell them that don't unnecessarily hop around or move around certain things that are very, very subjective, but let's talk business. Let's keep the lines clear. Let's talk about a rule-based world order. You follow the same, I will also follow the same. I think with both of these, we are trying to do this one. I think the Prime Minister is very clear in terms of the way, if we have to ask me a comparison between European Union and West Asia, I think we are much better with West Asia than European Union. European Union still tries to push across certain things, and it would talk big things, but in delivery, I think we're still lacking behind, and they don't really do things to what they promise. So I still feel, I think with West Asia, our movement is much positive, and I think we have made inroads, we have dehyphenated, we have learned the game of politics. I still remember a scholar who said, India during the Cold War did not learn the grammar of international politics. I think now we have learned grammar, and we have gone little beyond grammar itself in international politics. I'll probably stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore. So in the first round, we touched upon many specific aspects in which it came out very clearly that India has to become ready even more than we are now in terms of playing a leadership role in global affairs in this emerging new world order. So I want to go to that aspect in terms of India playing its leadership role, in terms of punching its own weight, as Ram Madhav ji mentioned. as Professor Nalapat also mentioned. I want to ask each one of you, starting with Ram Madhavji and then Dr. Nandakishore and finally Professor Nalapat, what does India need to change from the current state of affairs in terms of three things? One is mindset, second is institutions, and third is in the realm of technology and economics. In these three realms, what do you see as things that need to change going forward if India is to play its, what I could say is a fair role that India is? I mean, 100 years ago, I think uh, Ananda Kumaraswamy, the philosopher, asked the question, what has India given to the world? And he talked in terms of culture, philosophy, and the metaphysical things. 100 years later, what can India give to the world? Do we even have our own model of, living and economics and technology and all that, even things like climate change? So in all these affairs, if we have to play a leadership role, then what needs to change? That's the question I want to ask, starting with Ram Madhavji.
Yeah, of course. Many things have to change. First and foremost is our mindset. We are too simplistic, too romantic, without meaning anything negative about my fellow panelists, Professor Nandkishore and others. We get very easily swayed by immediate developments. There is no such thing called West Asia independently today. It is West Asia, North Africa, which generally is called Middle East. Why we are being patronized by the Saudis and others is because they see the challenge coming from countries like Iran, countries like Turkey, and from the back door by China. So they now feel, the Americans especially feel, that India needs to be kept on our side. So keep giving India some, you call it lollipops or some olive branches occasionally. But that Western Quad we talk about, in which we have Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and India. And UAE is today having equally strong bilateral economic ties and military ties with China. The first and only visit that King Salman made in 2005 out of his country, Saudi Arabia, was to Beijing. They are not idiots. They know that they need to, balance the relationships on all sides. For you to come of age, you should be able to dictate things in this world. Are you able to dictate things in your neighborhood? India has to start from there. India has to play a much more proactive role in starting with neighborhood, starting with ASEAN, Indo-Pacific. Then, of course, go to the Western Europe and other countries. Of course, the Western Quad is economically important for us. Out of that Western Quad arrangement, we are now going to have the first ever FTA, free trade agreement, with UAE under this government. 7 years, we have not signed a single FTA. Not even with Australia, not even with New Zealand, not even with a country like Sri Lanka. We refuse to do it. Finally, today, thanks to some individuals, we are able to move forward, and we are going to have an FTA, free trade agreement, with the UAE. That's why you have to lock countries into your bosom. You have to bring them into your fold. So relationships should be based on what you want. Are we clear as to what we want from West Asia? Are we clear as to what we want from the Arab world? Is it just money, or beyond that anything else is there? On these issues, India has to think seriously. India's challenge is North Africa also. We are nowhere in the picture. North Africa is a battleground for Arab powers on one side, Turkey, Iran, and China on the other side. So this is a very complex kind of order that is evolving today. India needs to first of all set its priorities right. It has to decide what it wants to do in 10 years from now. I think that is where we are struggling. I somehow feel that we are still in that simplistic mode of 50s, 60s. We can easily be, when we are very, we get happy very easily. Alpa Santoshi, we are. But as I said, today countries like China want to dominate the world. That is the whole idea that with which they are moving. New agenda items, as I said in my opening comments, offer a great opportunity, like climate change issues, technology issues. They offer a great opportunity. Are we in a position to leverage them? Are we in a position to aggressively move forward in that? That is where the crux lies. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram Madhavji. Now I'll go to Dr. Nandakishore before coming to Professor Narpath in the end. Nandakishore-ji, it's the same question to you in terms of what needs to change in terms of mindset, institutions, etc. One thing I want to add is the ability to do critical analysis of other countries. That, is it where it should be, or do you think it's lacking? For example, other countries always comment about our society, our culture, our politics, everything. They have a number of think tanks which do this in a very rigorous and professional way. But do we have the infrastructure and the institutions to actually look at other countries' history, culture, and what are their ambitions, etc., and come up with the goods so that those can become important critical inputs for policy making? So you can take up this question also in your answer. Dr. Nandakishore.
Okay, thank you for this thing. What I see here is the aspects that were brought by Madhavji. I think it just brings back us to a particular scenario, what we have looked at, the type of disruption that has come into the world order. And then I'll come back to the question that you have posed with regard to the ability that we are trying to, or what we need to augment at this juncture to move forward that one. I think the first and foremost is there is an amount of disruption that has come into the economic world order. That is what I see. Economic order itself is going that way. Because on the one hand, we need certain multilateral institutions for the prestige and for many other contacts and other things. But if you look at from a very pragmatic approach, I think it's much more in bilateral that we earn or we gain, because we will be very, very specific. We will accept what we have to do. But the thing is, there are two layers of looking at any sort of commitment or our own position in the world order, where in one, we are trying to look at what immediately we will be able to gain. But the thing is, with power comes responsibility, and with power comes expectations. With power and visibility comes also vulnerability. That is the other problem. Either you can withdraw and then you can just do your job and then try to be that way. Or if you are ambitious to go to the next level, you need to accept certain responsibilities and go. I think during these responsibilities and then being part of multilateral institutions, I think you need to invest yourself much more and you need to make commitments. I think that's what exactly we're trying to do with regard to the environmental component, where climate change and many other things are, and we are taking responsibilities, because you can't be doing both. You can't expect guests to come home and then rice not to get over. Now that doesn't work. So that's where I think India has taken up a scenario where it says, yes, I want to be a power, I want to be a great power, but at the same time, it cannot say that I will not be able to take responsibilities in certain things. I think when it comes to the question of responsibility, I think there are many other limitations and contradictions from resources that we have and the type of reliance that we have in a complex interdependent world, where we ourselves are not able to move towards what we had anticipated. Let's say something like Atmanirbhar Bharat, to many other things. We still haven't been able to. We were talking about Israel. Right? If 49 to 50% of Israel's defense production come to India, that means where have we reached to? That means there is still an asymmetric relationship that is existing. Maybe the business is what is keeping us together, but there is something that we need to have a win-win scenario is what I think here, because we are facing a sort of scenario where there is an amplified role of technological development, threatened global social safety as well as security. There are many more negative sides of the story in the world order that we are living in than the positive sides of it. And positive sides or positive things cannot happen in isolation. That is another problem in international relations itself, because there is this renewed focus on protecting global environment, and then also trying to look at the relevance of institutions and nationalism and many other things that we are talking about. I don't think that's the flavor of only our nation or just Europe or anyone. I think across the spectrum, nationalism is a flavor of the 21st century itself. Now, then what are these determining factors that are going to refine or that are going to define the world order that we are trying to look at? Are geoeconomics, geopolitics, resurgence of some sort of an aid diplomacy. Without that, it cannot happen. I think that's where I was mentioning complex interdependence, where we need to help each other. The way if human beings are dying like flies, and I don't think we can just leave and look at only the business part of it. There where I think multilateralism comes in, and then environmental protection. Now, strengthening economic self-reliance is perhaps what subtle way I think Ramadaji was hinting at, saying that until and unless we become strong, until and unless we will be able to replace some of those people whom we feel are challengers to us, whether it's a neighborhood or an extended neighborhood or elsewhere. If we are complaining about someone, we should be in a position to replace them. We should be in a position to go there. For that, internally, we need to become stronger from the economic perspective. I think without economic strength or without what is the economic self-reliance and managing the supply chain in international system, I don't think we'll be able to stand in front of China. I think that's exactly where I'm coming to. Second is diplomacy and collaboration. That is very, very important and a crucial component here. Whenever we take certain decisions, I think we need to also collectively take certain countries, at least who even for their diplomatic interests or economic interests, they are with us, or business interests, they are with us. But yet, if they're able to voice for us, I think that itself is a very important component, and then playing that leadership role that we want to. But none of these can happen in isolation. That's what I'm trying to hint at. All these can have to be complementary to each other, whether it's hard power, soft power, every other aspect that we are trying to look at, each of them have to be complementary. If we are not economically strong, we can't afford to spend on our defense. If without spending on defense, without being powerful, I don't think we are even respected about it. So I think everything is like a stage process. It's a cyclical one after the other. It has to come in, and India has to get probably like the way Deng Xiaoping spoke about, we black cat or white cat. I think as long as it catches mice, we should be able to be okay with it. I think India should just go with it. This is what I learned from my guru, Professor Nalapat, who is also here. He will be able to reflect on those fronts much better than me. Where, as I mentioned again, it is the rule-based world order that India has to push. Anything else, probably the world or the nations that are unable to bear with certain growth that India is having, probably will try pushing us to the contradictions. I think India's biggest issue is to overcome that contradiction, look like a unified system, and then take forward certain aspirations that it has. The three-layered one I keep talking about, there is aspirational, there is operational component. What we aspire, how we approach to that one, what type of institutions that we are building is equally important. On the last part that you asked about, do we have the type of think tanks that we are, I think slowly that is coming in. We still don't see a great critical mass that is able to write and continuously put across what it wants to. That persistence is still missing in a lot of Indian think tanks. I think there where we need to augment, we need to put in a lot of money, invest, because one important component is if students have to study international relations, if they have to study foreign policy, if they have to think about the country and contribute, it also should be incentivized. If there is no possibility for them to get into that and then think that I can contribute, probably will not be able to sustain. So for that, think tank culture has to come in a big way, and then think tank and policy making both have to go hand in hand. I think without that, it doesn't happen. A classic example in the United States, they put up one word, Asia pivot. Then you will see 100 papers bombarding Asia pivot, and then rest of the world will speak about Asia pivot. They say something on encirclement. 20 think tanks will talk about encirclement, then we will talk. That is not happening here. They still, I think, think tanks are trying to live in isolation or in silos. But I see the type of institution that Professor Nalapat has built, where we are trying to bring in Indian perspective. We're making students to use Western theories. We are not methodologically fanatics or anything. We're still using IR theories, which are coming from the West, but we are trying to bring an Indian perspective. What is good for our nation? What is good for our national interest? I think that has to come, and I'm sure, I think in days to come, if this is taken seriously, we'll have a new tribe of individuals who will be able to contribute. Think tank culture will pick it up, and then in a coherent manner, we'll be able to contribute what India aspires to be and where it wants to lead. I'll stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nandakishore. I'll come to Professor Nalapat now. So same question to you, sir. What needs to happen? What is happening in terms of us playing the leadership role, as you said, punching our weight, whether it's climate, whether it's economics, whether it's technology or geopolitics, international security, terrorism, all these issues. What do we need to do to take that leadership role? That is definitely ours, but we have to grow to take up that mantle. What needs to happen?
Adding to what I've heard here, first of all, let's remove romance. For example, our politics frequently leads to us feeling romantic about some situations and distinctly unromantic about another. I remember in 2003, when I organized the first ever India, US, Israel trilateral in coordination with JINSA in the United States and with institutions in Israel. The Vajpayee government opposed it tooth and nail. They said that this is going to create, I was phoned up by multiple people. The entire Muslim world will be opposed to us. The Muslim community in India will be on the streets. Yeah, and you are talking about, you are going to further this Jewish, Hindu, Christian conspiracy, etc., 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 etc. I had a very tough time. And there was a very strong effort at sabotage. But fortunately, whether it's L.K. Advani, whether it is George Fernandez, whether it is President Kalam, all of them may have cancelled their official meetings, but unofficially, they met the delegations. And I salute them for that kind of courage. So I want to say, let's not be romantic, even in the political sphere, because, when a mistake is made, we point it out. When something good is done, we point it out. I want to say one thing. We have got the opportunity of a century now, and that is decoupling. Decoupling of tech especially, but many other industries from China. Industries that rely on constant upgradation of technology are now nervous about remaining in China because the Chinese are so good at stealing the technology and then competing with them and perhaps even beating them. Huawei is an example of that. So there is a decoupling going on. They want to come to India. But then the point is, you have to have a clear signaling. One day we talk Hindi Chini bye-bye. The next day you say Hindi Chini bye-bye. Normal people will get confused. Very subtle minds will not get confused. But we are dealing with ordinary minds like yours and mine, and we will get confused. So this decoupling opportunity is an opportunity of $1 trillion. We have to seize it. And the only way to seize it is to show that today, when there is really, we're talking about Cold War, it's a bad word, maybe because we were friendly with Soviet Union at that time. But today there is a definite Cold War 2.0 between the US and China. We have to take advantage of that. The Chinese took the maximum advantage of Cold War 1.0 between the USSR and the US. We have to take the maximum advantage of Cold War 2.0 between China and the United States. And one way is to ensure that policies are put in place that a large number of industries relocating from China, industries from Taiwan, from the United States, from Japan, the three countries that assisted China very much and are today the targets of China, will come to India. So, I would like to say that, let us look at it from an India-centric point of view. and let us look at it in a hard-nosed point of view. For example, MBS in Saudi Arabia. From the very beginning, I have been saying nice things about MBS in print and on video and in conversations. And many people have got upset with me. He is this and he is that. I am looking at the big picture. The big picture is he is the first Al-Saud to say Wahhabism is not the future of Saudi Arabia or the world or the Muslim world. That's a very bold thing to come from an Al-Saud. So you look at the big picture. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is all good. Nobody is all bad. Look at the good picture. And if in full picture, you have an advantage. I would say the world is advantaged by having an Al-Saud stand up against Wahhabism when it is this family that has put Wahhabism on steroids. Way back in 1992, when I used to go to United States and say that Wahhabism and the Chinese attempt at domination, these are the two main threats. I was taken politely, but I could see nobody agreed with me. Today, people are coming back to me and saying, the two big threats of Wahhabism and China. I can only smile. So I want to say very clearly, we have a gigantic opportunity. In 1950s, don't forget, the Indian economy, it was much bigger than the economies of several countries that are today way above India in terms of per capita income. Then today, we have a similar opportunity and we have to seize that opportunity. Both Ram and Nanda have very correctly pointed out to the opportunities. And they have also pointed out to the mindset that is needed to seize these opportunities. So please, let us remove ourselves from prejudices. Let us look at things cold-bloodedly. When a scientist looks through the microscope, he doesn't worry whether he has got this view or that view about romance or politics or anything. He looks only at the microbes he sees. Let us look at the opportunities we have, the challenges we have, and cold-bloodedly take advantage of the opportunities and face the challenges in any which way. I want to end by saying, we have talked about the Quad. India has talked about a Gandhian Quad, and the other countries have fallen in line. Well, I can tell you, I for one believe that there must be a strong security construct. And in the absence of security, it's like having a house with so many treasures and no gate and no front door. It makes no sense to have a Quad without a security component. So I only want to say, this is a work in progress. We have the opportunity, we have the challenge, and we have to show that we can take advantage of it. I would like to see much more of that in the next 3 or 4 years, in the next 10 years, so that we can get this chance. Because if we miss this chance for the next 1 or 2 generations, we have lost it, as we lost it in the 1950s and early 1960s.
Thank you,
Raghuthamji.
Yes, Ram Madhavji. Yeah,
just 30 seconds. US has organized a democracy conference. We were one of the invitees and our Prime Minister also spoke. Of course, we are the world's most successful democracy, no doubt about it. But had we told the Americans that if you don't invite Sri Lanka, Bangladesh and Nepal, I'm not going to come, then you would have shown your leadership. Who is America to decide who is a democrat, which is a democracy and which is not? Congo is a democracy. Sri Lanka is not. America will decide. And we just follow. That is where I'm coming in. When you build relations, do you have your own priorities, your own, what you want to achieve? Then deal with countries. I don't mind, including MBS. Today, a big regime change is happening as President Alpat pointed out, in Saudi Arabia. Regime changes in the Saudi Arabian history, regimes always change from brother to brother. For the first time, it is shifting from father to son. Not an easy transition, because King Saud had 100 children total. Out of 100 children, MBS is the person trying to usurp the power and trying to take control of the country. He is doing certain very good things. Most welcome. But we should not forget the larger picture. It's a very complex situation. They are playing a very Wahhabist role in North Africa. Look at what they are doing in Sudan. What they are doing in Syria. So we need to be very careful. That's what I think. A leader has to have that kind of a very comprehensive vision, and leader has to stand up. Nalpat ji mentioned about Taiwan. Why not we allow Taiwanese ministers to come to India? Why not our ministers go? I'm not saying Prime Minister should go. Okay, we don't do that. Let ministers go. You know, chief ministers used to go. We stopped chief ministers also from going to Taiwan. How do you show leadership? This is how one shows leadership. That is where we have to move. Thank you. Sorry, I
No. It was nice that you interjected like that, because now I want to take up a couple of audience questions. And one of the audience questions I think is related to what you just said. Is there a doctrinal basis or a philosophical or whatever you call it basis for our approach? That is a question. Or is it ad hoc, piecemeal, it keeps changing? You know, it goes this way one day, that way one day. Is there, just like China has that Han nationalism, as Professor Nalpat said, and they have Confucianism, and Deng Xiaoping talked about, you know, carry a stick but talk softly. So like that, is there actually a doctrinal or vision basis for our approach to geopolitics? So I want to ask you, Ram Madhavji.
Not to my knowledge, but if you ask the people in the government, they will say that they have a very clear vision about the doctrine and it cannot be disclosed. Obviously, they tell you that.
Okay.
You know, doctrines cannot be disclosed to ordinary mortals like us. But I don't have any knowledge of we having any foreign policy doctrine. For that matter, more important for India than foreign policy doctrine is what earlier, a security doctrine. We don't have any proper national security doctrine. As a result, we respond from situation to situation, time to time. You know, today, China, what we did is wonderful with China today on the border. We are standing firm, eyeball to eyeball. But do you know that 35 years ago, 1986, General Sundarji also had stood eyeball to eyeball with China for 7 years. From there to today, what has changed that the army should understand? Now it's no longer just standing eyeball to eyeball, something more. What is that more? You need to do something else. Like something else means you do something else that puts them on defensive. You are on the defensive, you are trying to prevent them. That we have to do. We are doing it with a lot of valor, lot of courage. We have to do it. But we did it in 1986 itself. That is where doctrine comes into picture. Once you had a 1986, you had it for 7 years a standoff. You should imagine, next time standoff happens, what should I do? Should I again go and do the standoff for 2 years, 2 winters? We have capability to withstand another winter. Fair enough. How much you are spending? 3 crores a day. So that is where doctrine point comes into picture. I think no such thing exists. We are ad hocists on that, but maybe we don't know. Government has doctrine.
Thank you, Ram Madhavji. I think Ram Madhavji mentioned the security aspect, which is where I'm going to take up the last question from the audience, which is a specific question. I'll pose it to Professor Nalpat. We have been saying we want to become one of United Nations Security Council members, but it's not happened, and it doesn't seem to be happening. So what are your thoughts on that? Will there be a day when one day we will become a UNSC member, a full-time member, permanent member?
With a little bit of good policy and luck, in the next 20 or so years, definitely our economy will rise to a level where possibly we may be made a member. But today, China is going to oppose us. My point is very simple. Find out who your friends are by asking for a vote in the General Assembly for India to become a permanent member. I think we'll have a majority there, possibly a good majority, if our so-called friends in the UNSC support us. France, Britain, the United States have said they support India. Russia supports India. Let all of them go and campaign among these countries. And let's have a vote. And at the end of that process, let the Security Council vote so that we know who's with us, who's against us. I know China is going to veto us, and then that will remove a little bit of the romance that some people still have about China. So my point is, let us not be afraid of confronting our so-called partners with choices. Let us show substantively whether your friend or foe. In the case of our conference, after the conference, what happened? There was no reaction in the Muslim world. There was no reaction among the Muslims in India. It was another conference. It was ignored, completely ignored. So the point is, many of our fears are actually ghost fears. We are worried about things that do not exist because we have created constructs in our mind that do not exist, that possibly belong to the past and not the present. So I think it's very important. Look reality in the eye. Be confident, as has correctly been said by Ram and by Nanda. Be confident. Be aware of your strengths and ensure that your weaknesses are dealt with in one way or the other, including with other countries. I again end by saying this decoupling opportunity, tech in particular, is separating into China-controlled tech and US-controlled tech. The US-controlled tech cannot remain in China. In 3 or 4 years' time, no one is going to buy any high-tech equipment if it's produced in China or in a Chinese satellite like Pakistan. It's not going to happen. It can come only to India. For that, you have to have policies, signaling, and a mindset. So I'd like to say I stand foursquare behind both Ram and Nanda, and I pray that this particular conference, which I think has, is an independent conference, an independent-minded conference, and that independence of mind and freedom of spirit is the only thing that can ensure that India become a 5 trillion economy, hopefully by 2024, and a 20 trillion economy. There's nothing holding us back except, if I may say so, the vestiges of a colonial system, a colonial mindset, a colonial attitude that have long past its expiry date. Expiry date was 15th of August, 1947. Today, we are in January 2021, and it's still not expired.
2022, sir. Yes.
I'm sorry, 2022.
Yes.
I didn't want to be.
Can I be a devil's advocate and ask a supplementary question to Professor Nalpat?
Yes.
Sir, suppose we get the UNSC permanent membership. What are we going to achieve out of it? Is UNSC really able to do anything in the world? When we get in, half a dozen countries together with India, they are also going to get into that. Do we really have to be obsessed with it? Could they do anything in Afghanistan? Could they do anything in Crimea? Are they going to do anything in UNCLOS matters in Indo-Pacific? Do you think this obsession with permanent seat in UN Security Council is really that important? And let me ask you one very provocative question. We were heading it for last 1 year. What have we achieved in 1 year as the head of the United Nations Security Council? Can you please enlighten us?
Well, Ram, we were heading the WHO Executive Committee for 1 year, the entire COVID year. I'm not sure what we achieved during that 1 year. And I agree with you about UNSC. In my view, we should boldly speak up for democracy, for a multipolar world system, for the absence of hegemony that we are trying to see in the Indo-Pacific, for a free, open, and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Why are we speaking in whispers? Supposing I whisper something to Ram, and then I'm afraid of speaking it out loud, even Ram will not take me seriously. So the point is very simple. Let us not speak in whispers anymore. Not because we are only a 3 trillion economy, it is still pretty small compared to our potential, but because our people are so full of potential. All over the world, Indians are showing their potential. And don't forget, when you talk about friends and foes, the NRI community in multiple countries, it's a very strong force multiplier, a very, very strong force multiplier. And that comes from the 5,000, 6,000 years of history of India. Our history is not only 600 years old, it's not only 150 years old, it's not even 70 years old. It's about 6,000 years old. Let's celebrate that history, let's be proud of it, and let's take the full advantage of it.
Thank you, Professor Nalapad. I think we have had a very vigorous discussion. It's a very vast topic on the emerging new world order and what role can and should India play. But one thing is very clear, that we have to play a role, but we have to become ready for it. I think that's the sentiment that has been expressed here. We have to punch our weight, get real, whichever way you put it. Maybe start carrying a stick and maybe not even talk softly. So maybe we have to do all of that at the same time, gain economic strength. As Chanakya said, Dharma se moolam artha hai. So even if you say, I want a dharmic world order and I'm going to show how to go about it, we still need to gain economic strength so that people will actually start noticing us and hearing us carefully. And in many matters like disruptive technologies that are coming, I myself working in artificial intelligence field, and previously I worked in climate research at MIT as well. So in such matters, economic models, climate research, disruptive technologies, terrorism, and many such matters, I think India can and should play a big role in refashioning the emerging world order. But for that, we have to become ready. We have to want to play that role, and we have to equip ourselves, do all the homework, and become capable of playing that role. I think I am paraphrasing the vigorous discussion that we had in the right way. So I would like to now request Prashant to propose the vote of thanks, and hopefully we will have many such future interactions.
Yeah, thank you, Raghutamji. That was a very vigorous and very knowledgeable session. And for people who have asked questions and couldn't be answered, sorry for, we've run out of time. So proposing, before I propose the formal vote of thanks, I would like to thank Professor Nalapat, Dr. Nandakishore, and Shri Ram Madhav for taking time and being part of this virtual book launch. I thank them for their expert views and for educating us on India's role in the emerging world order. We learned a lot, and your words will guide us for a long time. Thank you all. I thank all the authors, participants, and all those who watched online and shared the proceedings and have commented and asked questions. Thank you very much. I also thank Dr. Raghutam for moderating the session and welcoming the guests. Finally, I thank Harish Tiptur for ably managing the online meeting and streaming. And finally, thank you one and all once again for taking time out and joining us for this book launch and this session. Until we meet next time.
Prashant, also inform where they can get the books.
Yeah, and the books are available online on Ayodhya Books and on Hindu eShop. The links will be are being shared on our Twitter timeline. We'll keep sharing the updates about this discussion and also the availability of the books regularly. So thank you for watching, and good day to all.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, have a good one. Thank you. Bye.